Hello, everyone. We are your landlords, flooding and tapping out so that you don't have to with the occasional screw. My name is Graham. I go by Hamhocks42 on the internet, and I'm joined, of course, as always, by the one and only Astralsflame. Astros, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, bud. It's Friday afternoon. It's been a sailing good week. A lot of sweet listens coming in, new brews coming out,
Oh,
things
yeah.
happening on the ladder. How are you doing? How's your Friday?
I'm doing well, man. Yeah, here in the States, we had Thanksgiving just yesterday, so
Mhm.
I am still a little bit stuffed, as you can imagine. Yeah, calorically, I think I'm good for a couple of days, but there are also leftovers that need to get taken care of, so I'll
Naturally,
do
of course,
do
of
with those what we
course.
can. Yeah, it's funny actually. American Thanksgiving not great for folks who don't enjoy soft foods, if you think about it. Because you've got your mashed potatoes, you've got your your various casseroles, you've got your cranberry sauces, and stuffing. It's a lot of like various flavors of kind of like soft foods.
Good
Um,
point.
which if that's your jam, hey, rock on. We got you covered. Unfortunately, I'm down for soft foods, so yeah, I'm enjoying it very much. And again, plenty of leftovers. But yeah,
Hey,
so life is good,
leftovers are
man.
the way of life.
Life is good. And on top of that, we're actually in a really cool spot right now because we're Lost Caverns and Vixen's been out for a little bit. So
Mhm.
we've had some opportunities to kind of experiment with some of the cards, but it's still new enough that I have no doubt there are still plenty of kind of brews and synergies that have yet to be tapped, and that we're still going to be well, appropriately enough discovering over the next couple of weeks. I have no doubt. And that's relevant given our current listing, or
Mm.
given the listing that we're going to be bringing to you today. Because today we want to talk about the different ways that players interact with the decks themselves. Not necessarily how they play, but how you go about getting your deck. You know, when you're playing a game of Magic, you have to start by shuffling up a deck of cards. Well, how do we get it? And well, there are a lot of different ways. So there are three major categories that we want to discuss when it comes to how one obtains a deck. There's deck brewing, where you
Yeah.
identify and kind of create the deck yourself for them. There's net decking, which is kind of the exact opposite, where you identify a deck that's already, that's seeing some success or being shared somewhere, and you literally just take the list card for card and reproduce it either by purchasing those cards or importing it into Arena or MTGO. And then there's also deck sharing, which is one that we see in physical paper or on MTGO, where players will literally have a deck that they allow other people to play. And actually, that's something that I know I've definitely done quite a bit in Commander, where I let people borrow my decks or I'll play somebody else's decks, and that can be a very I don't know, that's kind of a fun community, or a fun communal way to go about it. But I
Oh,
think net
100% it
decking
is.
and deck brewing are kind of the two major extremes that I definitely wanted to make sure we touched on today. Um,
Yeah, I would
and so,
certainly agree.
yeah.
Like, of those three, those are definitely the extreme. I feel like we forgot a fourth one, though.
Oh,
Mom and dad's credit card at the local game store to buy the cards.
I
I know
mean,
that's not actually one. I just
it is, but
subtle
it is
joke,
kind
subtle
of a
joke.
yeah. It's funny actually. When I was in high school, my dad expressed interest in Magic, and I got him
All
involved. And so,
right.
as a high schooler, my dad got into the game, and so all of a sudden, like when I would say, "Hey, man, I think this is a pretty cool card," all of a sudden a copy would just kind of show up. It's like, "Oh, well, that's handy." That was never. It wasn't why I did it for the record, but I wasn't complaining.
It's pretty. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. That's for sure.
I know. I mean, it worked out. I'm not complaining. So thanks, Dad. Appreciate you. All right. But yeah, so when it comes to deck brewing versus net decking, there are a lot of schools of thought on this, and I know the one that I definitely want to I want to start with net decking specifically,
Yeah, yeah.
um, because there are a lot of feelings and a lot of thoughts around it. So I know a lot of people, or at least there has in the past, at least, I don't know if it's as pervasive anymore, but in the past there was kind of this thought or this expression that was shared, um, that net decking was somehow bad. The idea that
Yeah.
net decking was a negative thing in Magic, where if you're not creating the decks yourself, then almost like you shouldn't be able to play them or you shouldn't have any kind of rights to that deck if you didn't create it. And that idea is preposterous.
Complete.
Honestly, just at the bottom line, I think that idea is just silly. Um, because right now there are thousands of players, hundreds of thousands of players around the world who are constantly trying to innovate and trying to find the next thing, and we're all using the same pieces. We're all using the same cards. And those cards are, I mean, there's a finite number of them in any given format, right?
Hmm.
And so naturally, people will find certain synergies independently of each other. And there's a good chance that if I go to build my own custom deck, if I build it around a certain theme, somebody in another part of the world who I've never heard of could end up building the exact same 75, you know, trying to hit the same theme. Am I somehow more entitled to it because I came up with it myself rather than finding it online? I think that's kind of silly. And at the end of the day, right now, if you see a deck out there, if you see something posted on the internet and it looks like fun, who is to tell you that you shouldn't enjoy it? That's really
Exactly.
the bottom line.
Like,
Yeah.
to your point about that as well, like when we talk about how the player base over the years has expanded, especially with the access of the internet, the amount of deck lists available to view has also increased. I never see net decking as a bad thing. Like, consider this like a scientific study for a brief moment. When you conduct a study, what's the number one thing you want to do? Run trials, find results. In the same way that
Yes.
Magic can relate to this, because there are now more decks being posted, more deck runs being done, you have a great testing ground to see what of decks is working and being posted about so people share their experiences. It is a great opportunity for a community to come together and find working synergies that either you may have briefly thought about or kind of tried but didn't consider other possibilities or didn't even know about at all. Like, net decking opens up a whole new world of like coming up with new innovative ideas and shaping a format, multiple formats even.
Absolutely. Well, and it's also really helpful at any point to understand what decks are out there. What are the
Mhm.
popular decks that people are playing? Because then you can craft, if you are focused on brewing primarily, you can tailor your brews to answer the decks that are popular. And so you need to know what's going on out there regardless, right? When you're deciding what to put in your deck, you need to know what are the cards I'm likely to see across the table, you know? Yeah, and at the end of the day, like if my goal, I think the other thing that people need to understand is everybody approaches Magic to get a different kind of experience.
Mhm.
We're all here to experience some element of the game independently. It's funny. My stance on net decking being 100% pro net deck is kind of funny because I don't do it very often. I generally prefer to brew my own decks, and Astrals, I know you do a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah.
Where my goal is to create like what I like to do is create a kind of a weird machine and see if it'll go, see if it'll do the thing. That's because that's the kind of experience that I like. That's what I enjoy doing. That said, there was recently the qualifier play-in weekend was historic. It was just a couple weeks ago, and I don't play historic very often. So as a result, I didn't have a historic brew that I really thought was going to be competitive,
Mhm.
but I wanted to participate in that tournament with very little prep time, actually pretty much none. And so I hopped online, found a historic Rakdos mid-range deck that was putting up numbers, and I
All right.
grabbed it, made a couple tweaks here and there, depending on kind of how I felt like, kind of what I was feeling. Mostly because the list I grabbed was prior to Ixalan dropping and Molten Collapse was available, so I thought
I,
I should probably put some of those in.
that is a good card. That is a very good card.
It's not bad. It's not bad. Um, and so I ended up getting like 3 wins, I think, or whatever. So like I scrubbed out, didn't make it to get the qualifier, but like I had a good showing, and I was using a deck that I knew was going to be successful in this environment. And as a result, I could focus on my play decisions and my mulligan decisions. And that could be the element of this event that was more meaningful. If I had time, I would have brewed something and, got it, prepared it ahead of time. But in that case, I just hadn't. And the thing is, plenty of players don't want the experience or don't care about the experience of coming up with a list themselves. That it's just not part of the experience that they're interested in. They just want to play the game, which is totally legit and totally fair. And
Completely.
that is and because that's the other thing I just need to point out. Building a magic deck and playing a magic are two different skill sets. Like
Completely.
completely and totally, and they're a completely different experience. Obviously if you're good at one, it's gonna help the other, but at the end of the day, it's just completely different. Like, and there are plenty of people who can build really cool decks and then like can't pilot them to save their life. And the alternative, and plenty of folks who don't even bother learning how to really build a deck, but can take a deck that is, known or out there and really identify how it's going to line up and really kick butt with it. So there's nothing wrong with any of these. Magic is a lot of things to a lot of people. Experience it the way you want to experience it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to me it kind of comes across. I don't know if you maybe remember from grade school, and this is going a ways back for both of us, but Venn
Mhm.
diagrams.
Oh yeah.
You meant like the two circles. Okay. So like to me, this when we talk about the deck brewing versus net decking, it's a Venn diagram to me because we can relate it like you just said to the players, right? You have the players that are good at brewing, you have the players that are good at playing. Sometimes you find people who mesh both in the middle, but not always.
Mhm.
Oftentimes in our streams, I've had people that say, "Hey, I have the sweet brew, but I don't know how to play it," or I'm a good player, but I'm not really sure how to brew," or like sideboard in some cases
Mhm.
too.
Oh
And
sure.
it's a good chance to kind of showcase that because the deck brewing aspect and the net decking aspect are the healthy mediums that bring that together. If you're great at playing a deck but don't know how to brew, net decking is the way you're going to find a list that can work and what you can look at and learn. If you're great at brewing, well, you're supplying the community with the decks that they can enjoy and play functionally as a brewer. If you post a list, it's probably going to get net decked one way or another. And that's great. You are getting a new list out there that people are trying and seeing. And players that get to get your deck by net decking and play it out are getting exposure of that deck list and promoting it in the community. Like, you can't have net decking without brewing, and you can't have brewing without net decking. Because if all you do is keep your brews to yourself, no one's ever going to see them, and if no one's brewing, no one's ever going to post a deck for anyone to see. So you need both.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the reality is a lot of the best players in the game and a lot of the like I think the competitive professionals, they do a combination. They'll take a known deck and they'll play test it and they'll practice it against the other decks that they expect to see, and then they'll massage it, tweak it, modify cards, maybe slot things in and out of the sideboard, which is why if you go, if you look at like big pro tour deck lists, the lists that were actually submitted oftentimes align with archetypes that we know from Magic Arena or these other events, but the actual 75 almost never lines up, at least in my experience, with another deck that you can point to and say, oh, they just took this other brew. Like that doesn't happen. It's like, okay, if Orzhov midrange or Fractos midrange is a known thing, great, but at any given event, you need to know what are the other decks I'm going to see, and there are probably opportunities to tune that deck so that it is best in that environment. Um, and I think that's really what it comes down to. And it's funny you mentioned sideboards as well. Sideboarding is kind of this beautiful mixture of the two, right? Because
Extremely is.
in that moment, you're taking this certain set of cards that you set aside, with this intention, and you are modifying your deck on the fly in the middle of the match. And so you need to know, how does your deck function? How can I make sure that when this is all done, I have a decent mana curve and my deck is still optimized to do the thing I built it to do in the first place, but now it's going to perform better against this matchup. It's a very interesting dynamic, and making sure that you select just the 15 cards that is relevant to any given matchup. Or I mean, your sideboard, you're probably going to have 3 to 6 cards that are actually relevant for any given matchup, right?
Yeah.
But unless there's overlap, of course. But in any event, it's a whole thing. But it's if you are a skilled deck builder, you are more likely and probably going to be more confident when it comes time to your sideboard, and be able to execute that a little more cleanly. Maybe, I don't know. It's weird. It's an interesting setup. Yeah, best of three is awesome, by the way. Just
It
big
is.
fans.
Play best of
That's
three.
not what we're here to
Save
discuss
it.
today necessarily, but just do it. It's great.
Just get in there. Just do it.
Just get in there. It's fantastic. Yeah. But yeah, and so then the other avenue that we see a lot is or the other avenue that we kind of want to touch on is deck sharing, which is something that's kind of different from all of this, where it's literally, I don't have a deck, you do. May I borrow your deck and can we play? And I know for me, I find this especially fun and useful in casual formats. Like I know in Commander, if you've never sat down at a pod, at a Commander pod, shuffled up and then handed your deck to the person to like your right or left and have them hand you one in turn and just play with somebody else's deck, it's a ton of fun. I highly recommend it. Yeah, I got to play an initiative deck once in Vegas in a
Oh.
pod that was not mine. And so that's always fun in that moment where you're just like, all right, I guess I'm gonna rip an idyllic tutor and go find something. It's really cool. It was like, well, this tutor's in the deck for a reason. There's got to be some reason to go find it, and so that can be a fun experience. It can change the way you play the game, right? If the deck is closed to you at the start of the game, it's obviously going to be different. But the other thing about that is when it comes to competitive events, I know there are formats like Modern and Legacy where the price point of a competitive deck is incredibly high. Making simply borrowing a deck that a friend has is going to be much more approachable and much more, I don't know, manageable in many cases rather than having to buy one yourself. Like I haven't played very many games of Modern in my life, but the ones I did, I was literally borrowing a deck from my buddy Hollywood Pizza. Actually, yeah, he brought some Modern decks to Vegas and we jammed a little bit, and it was really fun. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, he had a Demir Reanimator deck and then a Mono Red Burn deck.
Ooh, both
Yeah, or
very
no, I think it was
spicy.
Boros Burn. But yeah,
Oh,
no,
okay.
super fun. It was great. Games were done by turn 3 pretty much consistently. It's like either the Archon fires on turn 2 or 3 and you're dead, or you're just gonna burn me out and that's that. And as a result, you could jam a crap ton of games in an hour. It was awesome. But in any event, these formats that are expensive, it's not reasonable to assume that in order to participate at some event coming up in your area, you're gonna drop $1,000 on a deck of cards. Like the price of that is prohibitively expensive for many players. But at the same time, I understand like the legacy community is something I hear is that they're very welcoming, and if somebody is going to a legacy event, they will bring in many cases they'll bring 2 or 3 extra decks with the intention of giving it to other players who haven't had an opportunity to buy into the format yet, and
Very, yeah. I can
that's
confirm
awesome.
that. It's very true
Yeah.
about that. Like, because a lot, like the thing with the legacy format, we understand it's expensive.
Oh
Like,
my goodness, yes.
it's just the sake of there are cards that have not been reprinted and probably won't be due to certain things we will not get into on this show, such as reserve lists, and that's a whole other can of worms.
A
But
whole other episode. Yep.
due to reprintings and stuff, accessibility of certain cards just isn't what it is. So, like a Tabernacle of Pendrevale, very prominent in land stacks. It's a $4,000 card. I like to drop $4,000 on one card, and yeah, no thanks. But like,
Yeah.
and then there are also cards that are being used that are like 25 cents, like Punishing Fire, and it's this amalgamation of stuff. So, like Ham said,
Hmm.
people will bring a couple extra decks so they have, because we understand, like we get it, it's expensive. Not everyone is going to drop the cash for that, but at least those that have had the investment in the long term, in the longevity of the game, have the cards and have built the decks and can give you access to try it. And I kind of on this point of deck sharing, I like the perspective that deck sharing gives, because I find it's a different perspective from just a brewer or net decking, right? From deck brewing, you get the brewer's perspective of how they made the deck, and you're playing it on trying it. When you're net decking, you realize, okay, I am grabbing a deck that has probably just done well, but you don't know any prior history. However, when you're borrowing the deck, the person you borrowed it from, they're probably known to you. They may be beside you.
Hmm.
You chat with them. When you say player do certain things with the cards, you'll see their face light up. You'll see expressions change. You get a whole different experience from doing that. And I love that with the deck sharing, because it's like you see someone engaging in a whole different type of deck experience and learning in different ways. And that to me is what I love with deck sharing. It's my favorite of the three, personally.
Heck yeah. No, I love being yeah, again, I think of it in terms of Commander a lot. But whenever you're playing another person's deck or you're watching somebody play your deck, that's another thing. If you haven't had the opportunity to hand a deck that you made over to somebody else and watch them pilot it, it's really interesting because they might see lines that you never realized.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really fun. And then on top of that, like I've definitely seen yeah, I've seen my decks get like twisted in weird ways and do like bonkers stuff that I had not intended. And it's really fun. But at the same time too, the other side of that's true as well. When you're playing a deck that somebody else let you borrow, and if you have the opportunity to just ask them, oh hey, why did you include this, or why didn't you include this, and then they get an opportunity to share their thought process and maybe light up a little bit because they focused and
Hmm.
they took some time and really built a deck, built that deck to do a certain thing. Yeah, and I don't know. I get the biggest kick out of those kinds of things. And I don't know. It's funny when you play a lot of this game and when you see a lot of decks, it's easy to look at a deck and have a really clear understanding of what the deck is trying to do. I know that you and I both on our streams, like we can take a viewer's deck, pull it up, and do a deck tech on it immediately
Yep.
because we know, especially when it comes to standard, because like the card pool is relatively small. I understand how it goes, and like every now and then, my community will throw me some weird curveballs where they'll bust out some things that have some really weird interactions. It might take me a second to kind of see the lines, but when you spend enough time in this world, spend enough time looking at those cards, it's not too hard to look like, okay, this is a mid-range deck. I'm noticing these key pieces along the curve. It looks like this is the finisher. This is the game plan. How much removal do we have? How many? Are there any goofy build arounds? Like if somebody shows me a deck and it immediately has like, if I see like Orvar the All Form or like Vesuvan Duplimancy, it's like, okay, you're trying to do some silly stuff. What do we got with that? And those are fun. I enjoy those. But those are kind of big. You don't see them very often. So those are kind of like the spotlight hits them very fast if you know what to look for, when you're glancing at a deck. So, I don't know. When you spend so much time in it, it's easy to do a quick identification of what's going on, understand how it works, and then the finer points you figure out as you're playing it or in the discussion. Um, but if you're not as invested, if you don't spend that much time looking at these decks, it may not necessarily be evident. And the more decks you look at, the more exposure you have to a bigger card pool and more interactions, the quicker that becomes. And the better part about that is once you understand more types of decks, you can identify play patterns coming from across the table when you're in the middle of a game. So when you're playing your game, you can read the opponent's decks better to the point where I don't know about you, but like when I'm on the standard ladder, if I'm in best of one versus best of three, based on the first land that hits, I have a decent idea as to what my opponent's doing. By the time the second one shows up, I am confident I know what deck they're on like 90% of the time.
Very
And
similar. Very
yeah,
similar. And
it,
even
yeah.
even past that, but like not just on the lands telling the deck, but there will be indicators on certain plays. Like,
Hmm.
the Esper deck we've come to love, if you will. If they have 4 mana up, there's probably only 2 spells they're playing. It's
Hmm.
probably an Emperor or it's probably a Memory Deluge.
Absolutely.
And
And they might have both in their hand. You don't know. So if you do attack, the Emperor might come down. Because when you get to the end step and they deluge, it's like, well, should I have attacked? I don't know. Maybe not. Like it's still,
hard
yeah.
to say.
It's hard to say. But the other thing about, yeah, you see those kind of indicators. The other thing is like, especially with the standard mana bases, and this is where there's some 5D chess that can happen in the middle of a game if you're thinking in terms of a deck builder. If you see, okay, so Deathcap Blade, for example, it
Mhm.
is the green-black dual land that enters untapped if you have at least 2 other lands or more. So, um, if it's turn 2 and my opponent plays out a Deathcap Blade and it comes in tapped, then that tells me one of two things. Either they didn't have a turn 2 play and they're hoping to get me overthinking things, which good on ya, I will. But or it tells me they don't have the third land.
Mm.
They don't have a third land in play or in their hand because otherwise they would have played that one and saved the Death Cap Blade for the next turn. And so as a result, if I have like a Liliana of the Veil or something, all of a sudden I'm much more likely to uptick that thing and go attack their hand. Because it's like, okay, you're missing out on resources. If I can remove the playable cards out of your hand right now, or if you have a mind rot effect, go blank, that kind of thing. If I can restrict your resources now while you're vulnerable, then chances are you're not going to be able to have much moving forward in this game. Those are the kind of indicators where it's like, yeah, my question is like, okay, do I hit the mind rot or do I try to play a creature and establish a board state? Well, how the land comes down can indicate that. And if you're familiar with building mana bases, you can identify those little cues. And you see that too with like check lands.
Extremely,
If your
yes.
opponent, yeah, check lands, shock lands, whether they're shocked in or not, like those little details. And I keep pointing out the mana base because as a new player, that is like the most easy thing to overlook. You
Extremely.
know, yeah. So I just want to point that out. But there are other factors, that I don't know. Again, as a deck builder, you can't help but think of these things. You think of it in terms of your curve. You think in terms of when to hold up interaction versus not, and you can kind of see that yeah, and it does help when you're playing. I find it fascinating those little nuances. Um,
No,
yes,
100%.
in
Like
an
the
event.
the nuances are things you pick up through each of the different stages of that too, right? Like let's as a brewer, when you're building the deck, the mana base is the most important thing usually to getting
Hmm.
because You can't cast your spells if you don't hit your lands and you don't hit your colors. And the
Yep.
type of lands you put into your deck are functionally going to affect the type of spells. So if you were playing, let's go with, because we're already on Golgari, you're going to run the Death Calculate. You're probably running Restless Cottage. You're probably running Llanowar Waste. And then you're going to run a split of Swamps, Forests, Boseiju, and Ataki Numa.
Yep.
You
100%.
you know how that land base is going to look. So if the opponent happens to go like Restless Cottage on 1 and a Death Calculate on 2, for example, you as a brewer identify, well, they've played in 2 tap lands in a row. Obviously, they don't have an untapped land, but it could also mean maybe they just don't have those plays and they'd rather get the tap lands out of the way. Like, you can start to formulate what their deck may be just by, as Ham said, how the lands are played and what order they're played, what they're trying to do and make accessible. As a net decker, from that same perspective in the game, you realize, all right, in the first few turns, I've got this great opening to generate value against my opponent and take the lead in the game. As a deck sharer, if you're experiencing the same thing, you're like, well, I'm trying this out. I'm learning things and I'm going to figure out what to do against this deck if I haven't seen it. And experience each of those and those different perspectives are going to make you a better player because you get your eyes open in each of the different perspectives.
Heck yeah. Well, and the other thing about that too, if you were looking at just deck brewing, to give kind of deck brewing tips for a second, when you're deciding on what mana to include, when you're looking at your land base and wondering, okay, should I include this or not? And one example of that is the pain lands in standard right now. You know, your Llanowar Wastes and your Caves of Koilos and all those. The question of do I include these or not, it's easy to think of just in general terms and think, oh well, my deck has a lot of black cards and there are also a lot of green cards. I should probably have more duels. Great. And if you just need more duels, then they are an option. But the most important thing to think about is, okay, on turns 1, how important is it that I have black mana? And how important is it that I have green mana? Okay, then on turn 2, how important is it that I have black mana versus how important it is I have green mana? And just think that way up through your curve, especially in those early few turns. Because if you're running a whole bunch of like tap lands, especially like the tri lands, if you've got a critical mass of the tri lands in your deck, you better be looking to be doing like 5-color shenanigans or have some way to cheat them into play or have them come in untapped. Like you need some combination of those things because otherwise you're going to be playing a turn behind the entire game. And so like if you have, so honestly the thing that I think was really important, like the fast lands and the pain lands showed up around the same time in standard, and they showed up at a very important time. Blood Tithe Harvester is one card that kind of illustrates my point. That card needs you to have black mana available and red mana available on turn 2 for it to be at its best. And so your turn 1 play needs to give you either black or red, or both ideally. And then the second play needs to give you one, you know, whatever one you're missing. And so all of a sudden, if I have nothing but these restless tap lands and tri lands, I'm never gonna play a Blood Tithe Harvester on turn 2, or almost like very rarely. Like if I hit the Xander's Lounge on 1 into a swamp on 2, okay, cool. We happen to get there. But it's far more likely that we're gonna hit the Xander's Lounge on 1 into you know, the Restless Vents on 2, and it's like, well, all right, now it's turn 3 when I'm playing my Blood Tithe Harvester. Meanwhile, my opponent at this point, if they were on the play, all of a sudden they have a Sheoldred dropping on the other side of the board. Or, you know, it's just like, well, crap, I'm so far behind here. This is unreal. And so when you think, okay, how important is that black land or the black and red split? It's like, well, if you're putting in the pain land is escaping me right now.
Sulfur Springs.
Sulfur Springs, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm seeing the original artwork where the dude was just chilling in or the little demon was chilling in the pool, and it's like I could see it, but yeah, Sulfur Springs. So when you're thinking like, okay, do I include the Sulfur Springs in the deck or not? It's like, well, how important is it that Harvester hit on 2? If the answer is very high, then yes, you want that in your deck. You want to make sure that you have a land that will enter the battlefield untapped on turn 2 and can produce red or black. And you need to be willing to take a damage to do it. You know, it will be worth it. You know, in a lot of the cases because of how valuable the Harvester is at that point in the game. Yeah, because all of a sudden in that case you have a 3/2 that's live that can block immediately, and the following turn it could be removal if you need it. So that's one example of why that's so important. And if you have a deck that is more controlling and you're looking to get into the late game, well, how many 2-mana interaction do you have? Do you have your Essence Scatters? Do you have the Make Disappears? Then if so, you need untapped lands that you can drop on 2. but you can get away with running your Raffine's towers and your restless anchorages. Because in the later on turn 3, maybe that third land being tapped is not that important. Which
Yeah,
case,
it may not
play it or
matter.
tap land. Who cares? Like, it'll be fine.
I
Anyway.
think that brings up a point though, right? Like with respect to the brewing tips, but in general, again looking at brewing and net decking and sharing, right? Brewing, you know why you've put in certain lands and done away. Net decking, you're gonna learn because you're playing the list. And deck sharing, well, you're gonna experience it by trying it out the first time and have the person with you.
Mhm.
But all of those together, like you still need to understand fundamentally between each of those why the deck was made the way it is. A net decker is
Mhm.
going to look at how am I going to play this deck? The person that has shared the deck is going to be like, all right, why did you build it this way or construct it this way? And I know those sound very similar, but there is a difference because the deck sharing has access to the person behind it. The net decker will only have the list to it. So the net decker has to draw the association by themselves, whereas the deck sharer has the person with them. Big difference on that, big experience gain on either part, because sometimes it's great to learn on your own, sometimes you need help. While the brewer is going to be the one that puts it together, right?
Mhm.
And in each of those circumstances, you still got to see what's the deck going to do, how's it going to do it, and when are things going to happen. Because, like, let's go back to the Blood Tithe Harvester point. A turn 2 Blood Tithe Harvester is so much better than a turn 3 Blood Tithe Harvester,
Yep.
especially if we're in a match of like Rakdos mid range versus Mono Black. If you play the turn 2 Blood Tithe Harvester, let's say the opponent has a Liliana. Well, the Liliana might come down and force the sacrifice on the Harvester. That has meant now you don't lose a card in your hand. Your opponent has had to use a key removal piece right away that can't target, I don't know, your She-Holder or Decadent Dragon or something in the
Mhm.
later turns. But, you know, analyzing curve and understanding why things are built their way is a reason to get into like understanding how brewers think, net diggers may think, and how deck sharing will make you think as well.
Oh, 100%. Liliana, that's a great point. Because Liliana dropping on 3, if they have to downtick to remove something, then they have now forced they've given up a resource.
Mhm.
And now you can interact with that Liliana on your terms. Like, you control how that interaction goes now, in a way. Meanwhile, if you don't have a creature on board, they drop Liliana uptick, both players lose a card, they might discard something they want in their graveyard. That's the worst when you see them discard a reanimation target or like a tenacious underdog. It's like, oh
So
man.
seriously, I think the underdog is more scary to me than sometimes in the
Mhm.
reanimator target. But yeah, it's just like, oh, cool, you
Because
discarded the thing you're gonna recast from the graveyard. Great.
it's like you were probably gonna blitz that next turn anyway, so awesome. That's so it cost them nothing, and now their Liliana has 4 loyalty, so she's teed up for 2 down ticks throughout the course of the game. So you need to drop multiple creatures in order to threaten her. Because now all of a sudden, if you're looking at 4 mana and you have a Shelter in your hand, you just can't run it out because otherwise, then Liliana's gonna down tick. I mean, at least if they have removal in their hand, they might still keep
Yeah, you would just be
upticking
done.
Liliana and just go for the ult, which is backbreaking. So Liliana's a fantastic card, but I think everybody can agree on that. But at the end of the day, it really it establishes the point of how important the curve is, and it's another one of those cards. If I see Liliana in somebody's deck, they put it there for a reason,
Mhm.
and I need to understand that reason. It could be that it is not impossible for them to include it just because it's a good way to kill a creature for 3 mana. If you're likely to go up against mid-range decks or reanimator decks or whatever that have these large creatures and few of them, then all of a sudden, a downtick edict effect is very powerful, and she's probably going to pull damage that would have gone to your face the following turn. Even if she bites it at that point, okay, fine. But often, uh, people will include Liliana if they themselves get value out of discarding. And there are a lot of strategies where that's the case. It could be reanimation, it could be delirium, they could be doing unearth stuff, they could be doing madness. Like, whenever I see Liliana the Veil, I want to look at the cards around it and figure out, okay, if I uptick her, what else can I do with that? And usually there's something. Then when you're looking at some other people's decks, usually they have something. Or they at the very least expect to just be out of cards
Yeah.
quickly so that it doesn't cost them anything. With very aggressive decks, that's very much the case often. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's all the point. Kind of, it makes me curious though, dear listeners. What do you prefer? Are you a brewer? Are you a net
Mhm.
decker? Do you engage in deck sharing or sharing your brews? let us know in the comments down below.
Yeah,
I'm very curious on this one. Yeah,
absolutely. I
how
would love people's thoughts on this. Yeah.
I would as well, but I'm curious on your thoughts. So, like, I think we've obviously hinted at it, but of the three, how
Hmm.
would you classify yourself? Would you say you're all three? Are you two? Are you one? How would you classify yourself in this triad of ways of the deck world?
Sure. I think it's a lot like the player psychographic profiles,
Hmm.
Timmy versus Spike versus Johnny. We're all a little bit of all of them. In the right circumstances, I will do all of these. And so, but primarily when it's just when it is my free time and I get to engage with the game the way that I want to engage, I usually enjoy brewing. That's something that I prefer. That's definitely my mode. I love taking new cards and trying to find ways in which they interact and create something that's interesting and unique. I also love creating just weird combo engines and trying to make them fire. Oftentimes, even though they are less efficient than known ways to get things out.
Yeah,
The
that's
number of
fair.
times, so yeah, I had a mono green deck that I put together recently. The number of times I had to explain to my chat, no, I'm not putting in fight rigging. I should, but I'm not going to because every other deck I have right now has fight rigging in it. I want to see, can I win without fight rigging? The answer to that is not as often as I can with it, but regardless. um, I'm definitely more of a brewer, but at the same time, like I was saying, in going into a competitive event where I maybe haven't prepared as much as I would have liked, I'm definitely more of a net decker. Additionally, if I'm preparing for a competitive event, I'm definitely going to be net decking primarily at first, with taking a brew lens to whatever deck I'm working on and trying to put my own spin on it and make it more comfortable for my style. Um, and as far as deck sharing goes, I know when it comes to older formats where I just don't have decks, I love borrowing people's decks and getting to play. If they want to play, I'm more than happy to meet them on their turf and do that. And when it comes to Commander, I have entirely too many Commander decks. So this is a little shout out to anybody out there. If you ever see me at an event or anything and you want to get a game in, even if you do not have a Commander deck, I will have extra commander decks with me, and I'm happy to let you use one. I will have plenty of options for you. So if you want to rock out with an Olivia Crimson Bride action, maybe some Yuriko nonsense. If you want to destroy me with my own Yuriko deck, that is a service I provide. Let me know. Um,
Love
but
that.
yeah. So Astros, how about you? Where would you fall on the spectrum? What are you thinking as far as
Um,
these go?
See, I'd love to say that I'm a little bit of all three,
Hmm.
but I definitely know I am more of a net decker and deck brewer. I am right down the middle on that because while I do enjoy brewing, I also very much enjoy optimization of decks. So I will see what ideas I can come up, but I'll also see what other people are doing, and I will go grab lists from like top eight, like every week. Fire shoes, great guy,
Hmm.
posts
Oh
like the
yeah,
top
love
eight
fire
standard
shoes.
decks. I look at those top eight standard decks. I copy the ones that I think are interesting. Like, why did this Golgari mid range make it in? Five color. Okay, I know five color is good. I don't really need to check that out too well. Oh,
Hmm.
this soldiers deck isn't running typical soldiers. It's like a bouncing. I think, why did that work? And I'll grab
Hmm.
like three or four unique ones from the top eight or top 16. I'll copy them over and I'll do an in-depth look at it. I'll be like, do I like the card in here? Does it make sense to me? And I'll make my changes to it. So I bring the two together, and then deck sharing wise, I like to post every other day about different brews I have. I posted one today about Golgari prowess, sorry, Gruel prowess. Like the picnic ruiner
Ooh.
list. I posted up on Twitter today.
Hmm.
But I took a base list to that and I added in Tully's favor because I was like, this is +1/+1 trigger prowess and trample, and I get to discover three, which might hit another spell. So I was like, that doesn't seem bad. So like things like that. That's
Hmm.
a little bit of sharing,
Atali's
but big.
favorite. Atali's Favor with Prowess. I love that.
Yeah,
Because Atali's Favor is a great example of a card that is easy to write off at
right?
first. But I think it's actually pretty darn good because it is a 3 drop. All you get is +1/+1 and trample, right? Which is not a
Yeah,
lot on an aura, especially.
yeah,
But you get to
yeah,
discover 3, which normally when you see those kind of effects, the discover is lower than the mana value of the spell you're using, but that one's equal. And so you
yeah.
can find other copies of Atali's Favor and keep spinning. Which, okay, but what deck would like to do that? Well, a deck with prowess online, all of a
Practice.
sudden, that sounds really good.
Yeah, and like the stuff you can spin into, like you could spin into, a monstrous rage. You could spin into,
Hmm.
well, like you said, another Tali's favor. You could spin into like a hasty creature. You can spin into a picnic ruiner. that you add to your hand so you can distribute the +1/+1 next turn. Like I don't know. I don't know how good it is. I posted about it. I haven't tried it, but hey, it was like,
Seems fun.
let me share this idea. So yeah, I'd say all three, but yeah.
Now I'm wondering if that's a way to get Monastery Mentor back in the mix, because to
Yeah,
go like Boros with that with the Discover package, because Monastery Mentor is a card that reads like it should be great, and it just
right?
has become obsolete in a way because removals become so efficient,
Yeah.
and that's a shame because man, that thing's awesome. But
It's so
anyway,
good. It makes such a great board set. But hey, maybe it is. And like right
maybe
there, deck
that might be the
sharing,
answer.
ideas. Like, great, we've done it again. That's
Exactly.
We've done it again. We've broken the meta, Ham.
I love it. Love it. Yes, that's what it's all about. At the end of the day, engage with all of these because you will learn so much more about the game and be able to appreciate it on a much
Yep.
deeper level. And so whether you're primarily a net decker looking to just excel and just win games, understanding what's going on is going to be beneficial. If you're a brewer yourself, learn what other brewers are doing and why the net decks that are popular are what they are. Like, and who knows, you might be able to find the next big innovation. That's the dream, right? We all
It
want to
is.
be the brewer who makes the deck that like breaks everything and becomes meta. That's the goal. I've had a couple of decks like pop off and go viral and get a couple of people to mythic, but they've never like become the meta. Not yet anyway. I'm working on it though. Someday.
I don't
I
know
thought
if
my
I've
Sultan Ninja list right after Neon Dynasty dropped. I thought that would do it, and unfortunately it didn't.
I don't
But,
know if I've ever had a deck get deemed as meta. I'm trying to think.
mhm.
I don't think I have.
Yeah, I know I've had
Yeah.
a couple of brews that became popular, um, but within a very small niche, but
Mm.
definitely never like they never became the thing. Yeah,
That was
someday.
2024. Ham's gonna accomplish all that. That's it.
Exactly, exactly. There's gonna be some big. I'm gonna spike some huge tournament next year. Just watch. Yeah,
Yeah, you're gonna
make
play your
thousands with
variant of
some
like.
really spicy friggin' some 4-color brew nobody
Yeah,
saw
I was
coming.
gonna
Just
say
just
you're gonna
watch.
do like it's 4-color non-Atraxa. It's like the Ham special, and it's like,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
whoa.
It's gonna be
And
like, well, I
then,
wanted to go Sultai, but I wanted to go Jun, so just put
well,
them
why aren't
together.
you playing Atraxa? And it's like,
Don't worry about it. I don't need it. Because I got a tally, baby.
that's it.
Honestly,
That's it.
as a reanimator player, I've had plenty of moments where it's like, I should put a Traxa in this. And I looked down at my 3 Atalis. Like, nah, I'm
Nah,
good.
Tally,
I'll be
Tally for
fine.
days.
We'll be fine.
But yeah,
Yep.
very cool.
Yeah.
We'll say, Ham, where can the fine brewers, deckers, or sharers find you?
You can find me over on Twitch, twitch.tv/Hamhocks42. I'm also doing a number of collaborations these days. I have a personal YouTube channel that is mostly neglected, unfortunately, but on the homepage of it are all the channels that I do regular content on, such as this one. So if you wouldn't mind popping over there and just checking out those places, that's a great place that's where you can find me all throughout the week. So yeah. Yeah, how about you, man? Where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah,
And
everyone
what
you
can they
can.
expect to find when they get there?
Well, everyone, you can
Mm.
find me at Twitch, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube at Astralsflame. I'm always going to spread the message that you should be playing Jund and or Dragons. And that is Dragons with an S between the brackets at the end, because if you can't play a lot, you should at least play one. And I'm always hitting up on the standard best 3 format or some cool commander content.
Heck yeah.
And if you want to check out more of what the both of us do, well, why not drop us a follow? Keep up on the action. The landlords are here almost pretty every week. I mean, we're much more regular now.
We're getting better.
We getting there. We getting there. But yeah, drop us a follow. Keep it in the action. And everyone, until next time, we are your landlords.